I had to wash my hair today and I'm quite frustrated because it's first day hair and it's given me nothing. Nothing.
Flat.
I'm trying to stay calm. So, I'm so happy you could join me on this terrible hair day. Hey, welcome back to my channel. My name is Casey. I'm so happy to have you here today. Today, I'm going to be doing the eyeshadow palette tag part 2 created by Samantha March and Allie. If you've been here for a while, you know that I love eyeshadow palettes, so of course I'm going to do this tag. My channel wasn't around for part 1, so if you would be interested in seeing me doing part 1, I would be more than happy to. Just let me know down below. I will of course leave Allie and Sam's videos linked for you in the description box if you haven't seen them, as well as a list of all the questions, so if you want to take part in the tag, you certainly can. Even if you're not a creator and you want to look over the questions and leave your answers in the comments for me below, I would love to read them. With that, I'm going to keep this intro short and we are just going to dive right in and get to talking about palettes. The first question is, what is your all-time favorite eyeshadow palette? As with most people who are doing this tag, I really struggled with this one because, like, what does all-time favorite mean? My favorite, it lights me up, it makes me feel excited, it makes me happy, I love the color story, all of those things? Or do we mean all-time favorite palette because it's your go-to? It never lets you down. It's old reliable, if you will.
You're my boy, Blue!
And so I took this question more so in that direction, and I went with the Lorac Meraki. Being that it's my favorite palette, you'd think I know how to say its name. Someone please comment down below how you say this because I mess it up every time and it's getting embarrassing. I love the Lorac formula. If you watch some of my videos, you probably already know that. This palette has everything I could possibly need as far as neutrals go. It has a nice variety of mattes and shimmers and metallics. The shimmers and the metallics in the Lorac formula aren't my favorite. I prefer something a little bit more vibrant, but they're still good. I love how pigmented the shadows are. I love how they blend. I love how they last. This is the one that I always take with me when I travel, the rare occasion that I travel. Even though this is a basic neutral palette, I feel that every shade in here has a place. You know how some bigger palettes, there are some shades that are just, you know, a little too similar. It's like,
Do we really need 3 cream shadows?
I don't find that to be the case with this palette. There's enough variation amongst all of these shades that they all have a place. I love everything about this one. I had to be my all-time favorite. The next question, what is your new favorite eyeshadow palette? I went with the Huda Beauty Rose Quartz palette. I recently posted a video doing 4 looks using this palette, so if you're interested, I'll link it below for you. This was one of the very few palettes released in 2021 that really caught my eye. I do think it has a unique place in my palette collection. I love that it's a take on a cool tone, earthy palette, and it has these pops of these incredibly amazing shimmer shadows. They really do it for me. I love the eye looks I create with this palette, and I've noticed that as I'm doing my eye makeup, I get more and more excited the further along I get in my look, especially towards the end when I'm using some of these more topper, shimmery, sparkly shades. It just makes me feel so excited to go out into the world with my eyes looking the way that they do. I just love this palette. It was such a great purchase. The next question, what palette do you keep for the memories? And this brings me back to my Lorac Pro palette. This was the very first high-end palette that I ever purchased for myself. So I'm gonna share a deep dark secret with you. Well, it's not super deep and it's not really dark, but it's a secret for sure. I only recently discovered beauty YouTube, I would say maybe 4-ish years ago. Before that, I really only dabbled in drugstore makeup and anything that I received in my Ipsy bag. So as far as especially eyeshadows and eyeshadow palettes go, I didn't really know about the world of makeup brands and all that there was to offer. But I remember when I discovered beauty YouTube, I loved watching eyeshadow palette collection videos. I mean, I still do. One of the palettes that always caught my eye was the Lorac Pro palette. I just loved how basic it was, how neutral it was. It looked like one that I would love to use every single day. Also, at this time, I never really dabbled with colorful makeup. The most colorful eyeshadow I ever wore was maybe purple or silver. So to me, it looked like it had everything I could ever need. But the thought of paying more than drugstore prices for an eyeshadow made me cringe, made me very uncomfortable. It was something that I just never saw myself doing, which is a complete 180 as to how and who I am now. because I guess I just didn't think it was necessary. I was content with the makeup I got through my Ipsy bag and from Target or Walmart. I didn't know about this whole other world, okay? Don't judge me. I don't remember what sparked me to finally go through with the purchase. I had it in my cart and I sat on it for a couple days because I felt guilty, but I went through with it. I remember I was just in shock that I had just spent whatever $35 on an eyeshadow palette, which thinking about that now, $35 for an eyeshadow palette seems like nothing. But I was so excited. I loved this palette. I used it almost every single day. It was my first real taste into the world of eyeshadow and eyeshadow palettes outside of the drugstore. And I love that now, having tried many different brands, I still favor the Lorac formula. So it was just such a great first buy. It has a special place in my heart. I'm sure one day I will get rid of it. When I go through my cleaning and decluttering modes, I'm pretty cutthroat and feelings don't matter. But I only recently retired this one because I purchased the Mirakai palette over the summer. I just like savoring her for the memories at this point. The next question, what palette is the most underrated? I decided to go with the Pretty Vulgar Nightingale palette. This palette went out in a BoxyCharm a couple years ago, and it seems like more often than not, the palettes that come in the BoxyCharms and Ipsies are only so-so palettes. They're never really anyone's favorites. I remember feeling so jealous of the people that would have gotten the Nightingale palette. At that time, I didn't really have many cool tone palettes, and this just looked like the perfect cool tone dream. I ended up purchasing my own, and I love it, and I think it is truly so underrated. In terms of a cool tone palette, this has everything you could need. It offers the perfect variety of light to dark. The ratio of mattes to metallics is perfect. You've got some fun highlighting shades up here for your brow bone, you're in a corner. I find that the formula is very, very good. I don't have an issue with any of these shades. The metallics are very smooth. They're not too metallic-y and bright. They're very elegant looking on the eyes. You can create really beautiful, smoky, elegant eye looks. I have loved every eye look I've ever created with this palette. And I've never heard anyone talk and rave about it the way that I feel in my heart about it. And I don't really understand why. With the resurgence of cool tones right now, there's been many that I've been drawn to, like the ColourPop That's Taupe palette and the Natasha Denona Glam, of course. But I'm about to pull the trigger. I remember this palette and I'm like,
Why do I need this?
when I'm going for a cool tone look, I pull this out and it has everything I need. I really don't need anything more beyond this. I love this palette and I will personally continue to hype it up for as long as I have it. The next question, what palette is your favorite but you cannot get rid of? And I'm gonna go with my Pat McGrath Mothership 5 palette. I remember as I was exploring the world of makeup and makeup brands, Pat McGrath was one that definitely caught my eye. I love glitter and shimmer and sparkle, and her photos on her social and on her website are just everything that I love about branding. They're edgy, they're mysterious, they're very editorial, and they highlight the products in a way that just make them look otherworldly. Like they are just pure magic. As I just shared with you, my hesitancy towards spending $35 on an eyeshadow palette, paying $129 for an eyeshadow palette.
Immediately no. Immediately no. Immediately no.
Immediately no. Even still now, that's a lot of money to pay for an eyeshadow palette. Because of how expensive these are, I just never saw it being real for me until one came into my life. I had won a $100 Sephora gift card and I used that towards this palette. I remember the first time I opened it and was swatching it and was playing with it. The very first time I used it, it was just everything that I hoped it would be. And I do love this palette. The color story is beautiful. The packaging is incredible. This palette is an experience. However, it pains me a little bit now because this palette is not worth $129. I have issues with some of the shades, and for the price tag, you shouldn't have issues with a single shadow in this palette. And so while it's not a favorite palette of mine, I love it for everything that it is. For the Casey who didn't know about the world of makeup as it is and who dreamed of owning this palette. The next question, what is your favorite collab palette? This was an easy one for me because I don't think I have many collab palettes. I'm gonna go with the collab between Kathleen Lights and ColourPop, the So Jaded palette. I do not have mine to show you because I depotted it. I depot many of my palettes and then I use them to create my own color stories or to dupe new release palettes. I love doing that. I actually think that was the first colorful palette that I ever purchased. After I had depotted it and would go about doing my eye makeup using one of my created palettes, I'd be doing my eyes and I would think,
oh, that's such a pretty color. What palette is it from?
It seemed like every time it was from the So Jaded palette. There was just something about that formula that I feel was superior to many other ColourPop palettes. I loved all of the colors in there. The jewel tones were very pretty. They weren't overly intimidating, being someone that was new to colorful eyeshadow. It was a very well done palette. I remember feeling a little bit annoyed with ColourPop because the week leading up to and the week of the palette release, they were hyping it up big time, showing swatches and recreating looks with it. I thought the promo photos were incredible. And then the week after the release, they moved right on to the next palette. I felt really bad for Kathleen because people hadn't even gotten their palette yet. And I just felt like it deserved a little more time in the spotlight. But you know, I guess that's how ColourPop is. But I was very happy to have purchased it myself. The next question, what was your favorite palette from 2021? And again, I wasn't sure if they meant new release or just a new palette to you in 2021. Since I'd already talked about the Rose Quartz, I decided to, well, I'm stuck between two. The other new palette was the Languid Chestnut Toad palette from Sigil Inspired. I did a video talking all about Sigil Inspired as a brand and then a separate video doing 3 looks, I believe, with this palette. I did depot this one, so this is just the packaging. Maybe it's weird, but I kept forgetting that I had this because of how small it is. Okay, so let me do my thing. This palette was my first time trying Sigil Inspired. I felt that everything performed very well. There were 2 very unique duochromes in the palette, but I don't know that it's my favorite. The other palettes that came to mind were my Viseart Neutral Mattes palettes. I mentioned in a few videos back that I was feeling the pull to purchase them and I went through with it. This has sort of, Viseart has become neck and neck with Lorac for me because I love the formula. I get so much use out of both of these and so I feel like this would be my true favorite. But again, they weren't released in 2021, so it kind of depends what the question is asking. So next up, what palette did you not expect to love? Being that I am buying all of my palettes, I do kind of expect to love every palette that I buy. That is the hope anyway, right? So for this, I chose my Allie Girl Keep It Playful palettes. I bought them because their color stories drew me in. I love that they're both neutral. I love that they both had a nice variety of mattes and these beautiful shimmers. I anticipated loving them when I bought them. However, I didn't anticipate how much I would actually love them, how much they would impress me as a $10 palette. I did just talk about both of these in my most recent video, my favorite one and done eyeshadow video. I talked about how impressed I was with both of these palettes, how they perform and look on the eyes so much more expensive than they actually are. The mattes and the metallics in both of these palettes are very pigmented. Some of them, especially in this more neutral palette, are more of that thicker, chunkier type formula, but these are my type of metallics, my type of eye toppers. I don't know that I had never tried an Allie Girl palette prior, and being that they were a drugstore palette, I just didn't expect them to live up to how good some of my more high-end palettes are. You know, now that I'm more into this world of high-end palettes, I just didn't expect to love them as much as I do and to use them as often as I do, especially this smokier one up here. Next, what palette sparks the most joy? Oh, this is a hard one. I sat before all of my palettes and took the time to open up each one to determine which one ignited that spark of joy within me. In doing that, it actually was quite easy because I definitely felt my whole makeup loving soul light up when I opened my Sigma Enchanted palette. There's just something about mauves and pinks and greens together in a palette that does something to me in a romantic way that I cannot explain. This palette gives me Peter Pan vibes, not because it makes me think of Peter Pan, but because I just feel this inner child come out when I create eye looks with this palette. It's just so much fun. It's a unique experience that I don't quite get with any of my other palettes. I love that I can create softer romantic looks with this. I can create something a little bit more ethereal. I can do something more grungy, and the metallics are glittery and shiny and sparkly. There's so much joy in this palette, in the way it makes me feel when I open it and in the way it makes me feel when I wear it on my eyes. I'm glad that I sat down and did that little exercise, because just thinking about that question and trying to think of a palette at the top of my head, nothing was coming to me. But in sitting down and actually feeling that spark of joy hit me was really, really special, and there was no question that it was this palette. Second to last question, what palette is your newest? This was tough because I have a new palette in transit right now. So you're just gonna have to wait to know what palette that one is. For those of you watching that know me, that know my taste when it comes to eyeshadow palettes, I bet no one would guess what palette I just bought. I'll give you a hint, it is not a new release. It was a collab palette that released earlier this year. Leave your guesses for me if you'd like down below. I would be very curious to hear what you think. So I'm going with the newest palette in my presence, and that would be the Huda Beauty Nude Light palette. I love the Huda Beauty palettes. I love her formula. I love her color stories. They're neutral, but she always includes these pops of color and sparkle and duochrome and just that special wow factor that just really, really gets me when it comes to eyeshadow. And so I have acquired many Huda palettes recently. This was one that I had always wanted and was just caught in the middle because it looked like it might be too light. And you know, I had a moment of weakness, and a week later the palette was in my possession, and I don't regret it. The last question, what was the first palette you used in 2022? I had to scroll back through my Instagram stories to see if I had taken a picture of myself that day because I couldn't remember, and I will pop the picture up here on the screen. I am pretty sure that I had used the Urban Decay Naked Honey palette, and then I used some sort of topper in the center of my lid there. This is one of my favorite day-to-day neutral palettes. I think this palette is just stunning, especially if you have blue eyes, and so I really love dipping into this palette, even if I'm just using it to build up the base of my eye look, my crease and my outer corner. These tones just make blue eyes pop like no other. I'm not sure what shade is on my lid there. I don't believe it's anything from this palette, though. It looks to be a little bit more warm toned than what is offered in here, but I'm pretty sure this was the main palette that I used. That was the last of the questions for the eyeshadow palette tag. I hope you enjoyed watching. I know I certainly enjoyed talking about eyeshadow palettes. I always do. I would love to continue talking about palettes in the comments. Specifically though, I'm very curious to know what your guys' answer is to question number 1. What is your all-time favorite palette? Take it any direction you want. If it's one that is your go-to, or if it's one that just lights you up in a special way that no other palette does. I'm just so curious to know what your favorite all-time palette is. I want to thank you so much for your time today. Special extra thank you for enduring this terrible hair day of mine with me. It's been rough. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope you hit the subscribe buttons and come back next time. And until next time, I hope you have the most wonderful day. As well as a list of all the questions in the event. Or are we talk? Or do we need? I'm really struggling. I very recently did a video tutorialing, and it makes me so excited to go about the rest of my diet. And it just makes me so excited to go about the rest of my day. Come here. Were you sleeping? Oh, nice stretch. Come here. You know, everyone missed you in my last video. So you have to make an appearance every time. It's expected. What are you up to out there? You looking out the window? Neighborhood watch? You need a haircut real bad. You need a haircut and a bath. We're going in a couple days. So get your last looks at Shaggy Trace. My long hair chihuahua.